Dave, it's good to be on.
Hey, thanks for being here. And I am very grateful that you decided to reach out and come on here. And I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to start off maybe people don't know who you are. You work for Google, work for YouTube. You decided to blow the whistle on Google. Just explain in a short summary of why you decided to go ahead and blow the whistle on Google YouTube.
So I want to, first state that Google treated me really well. It was a great company to work for. All up until the last 3 years. And all the things that you hear about it are true. Free lunches, free massages. I was totally happy. I loved the work that I did. But then something changed within the executive team right when Donald Trump got elected. And after that event, everything changed. And so the way that it changed is, the first instance that I knew that something was up was the TGIF all hands on meeting that happened directly after Trump got elected, in which the CFO, the CEO said very inappropriate things, such as that they were personally offended at the election of Donald Trump. And the CFO was saying things on stage such as, I think we're going to lose this one, in recounting what had happened up to the election. And then what really interested me was the new CEO, Sundar Pichai, said that one of the most successful things that they had done during the last election was censoring fake news. And I was listening to that. I went, wait, what? We're censoring fake news? I didn't know that we're censoring anything. And so I started to search on the internal search engine that we have at the company. And what I found was that they had all these design documents about fake news and what they were going to do to, get rid of all this problematic fake news. Now keep in mind, Dave, that at this time, the mainstream media started pushing a narrative that there was all this fake news. You'll probably remember this, oh, this isn't real. Trump is using fake news and he's just creating an alternative reality. And so this started to become like a very predominant narrative in the mainstream media. And so Google took this position that they had to respond to this problem that had just suddenly become an issue. And so these fake news documents, these design documents that they had, were how they were going to respond to all this influx of fake news that suddenly started hitting the internet. And one of the interesting things is that the examples that they were using for these fake news design documents included actual events that had happened. Let me give you an example. Okay. So they said that Hillary Clinton running weapons through Benghazi to fund ISIS was an example of fake news. And I sat there and I said, well, I'm not really too sure if that is or not, but maybe it's a good idea to just start to, research. And so I started researching the background on this and I went, well, actually, I think this could be true. Oh, it looks like Hillary Clinton did. In fact, there was a whole email scandal and they had congressional hearings on it. Oh, wait a minute. The congressional hearings were for this event that happened in Benghazi. And it looks like she had not only, funneled weapons to ISIS, but that ISIS had fired one of our own missiles, a Stinger missile, at a helicopter and it didn't explode because it wasn't armed right. And then they traced it back through this event. And so I found that there was all of this, real information that proved that this narrative point was actually plausible. And so I started to suspect at that point, is this really about fake news or is this really about controlling the narrative? And so I started to dig further and further to try to figure out, what it was that they were trying to do with the fake news. And I realized that, well, if they've got a way to classify fake news, then they must have some way to execute on removing this fake news from their search engine. And so I went down another rabbit hole trying to find, well, what exactly is doing this censoring? And I found the program. And that program, that project is called Machine Learning Fairness.
So they created this entire program to handle this.
Yes. And so, what is machine learning fairness? Well, machine learning fairness is a type of AI. So if you imagine AI is this large circle, some of the AI in there can play chess, some of it can play, checkers, some of it will tell you what weather predictions are. there's a subset of AI called machine learning. And what it does is it takes in a pile of data and it uses a neural network to try to figure out what the patterns are without anyone's help, other than just the data that's properly labeled with the expected output. And so this machine learning fairness is this type of AI where you feed it millions of data points that you have the expected output for, and then it just figures out what caused that data to be labeled in that certain way. So for example, let's say that there's 1 million articles and you've got, thousands of raters that have gone through all these millions of articles and they've applied tags to it, like fake news or, not fake news, right? Or like real news. And so you've got, 1 million data points, half of them are labeled fake news, half of them are labeled real. You put this into a machine learning algorithm and it will train a new machine learning system that when you feed it novel data, it will apply those labels fake or not fake based upon the data that it was trained on. And so this design document was talking about how this system worked, all the subcomponents on it, including subcomponents like Project Purple Rain and some others. And so it was very clear to me that they had put a lot of time into this project, and they had sort of their plans on how they were going to convince the managers to make this machine learning fairness project a priority for all their different systems. I'm talking about Google Search. I'm talking about Google News. I'm talking about YouTube. And so, I started seeing this whole design, but this was early 2017. I was like, well, there's all these plans, but I haven't really seen it alter everything. And then over the course of the rest of the year, they started executing on the plan. They started pushing into more and more projects. More and more people started to be hired for this thing. And so then I went, okay, they're exiting the planning phase and they're going into the implementation phase. And I started to get more anxious because I was trying to figure out, well, what exactly are they doing? Why are they sacrificing their mission statements of organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible by censoring everything? I kind of woke up to the full extent of Google's censorship when I saw them remove a word out of the Arabic translation dictionary in order to make a Trump tweet sound crazy.
What was that word?
So that word was kafefe. Huh. In May of 2017, Trump went to Saudi Arabia, and there was this event that took place and involved a sword dance. You'll probably remember it a little bit. And it had a picture of Trump on his hand with his hands on a globe.
Right. Yes, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. And then after he came back from Saudi Arabia, he tweeted something like the following: "Despite the negative constant press, kafefe." And then he deleted the tweet. And then after that, I think he deleted the tweet and he said, "Can anyone figure out what kafefe means? Have fun." Well, right after that, the internet sort of figured out the puzzle. It turned out that Google Translate, when you took this word and put it into the translate.google.com and you hit translate, it auto-detected this word as being Arabic. And the English word that it spit out was "we will stand up." And so if you take this translation and you put it back with the original tweet, you get the full decode. Despite the negative constant press, we will stand up. Now, when the internet figured this out, the New York Times decided that they were going to run an article that said that the whole internet was wrong, that kafefe actually didn't mean anything. And to do this, they got one of their previous contractors, called them up, who was, I think, an expert at one of these Ivy League universities for language in Arabic, and said, "Hey, does kafefe mean anything?" And the guy, he laughs it off. He says, "Oh, of course not. No, it's just nonsense." So the New York Times posted, "Hey, this is nonsense," on June 1st, 2017. On the same day in Google, one of the AI executives created a design document that basically stated, "Hey, the New York Times says that this word means nothing and is nonsense, but we actually translate it into something valid. So therefore, we're in the wrong. And so they edited their own databases in order to remove this word from the Arabic translation dictionary. And so that word that used to mean something now meant absolutely nothing. And then 7 days later, I saw the Washington Post start to push this narrative of, well, the president's mentally incapacitated. He's tweeting nonsense. Let's invoke the 25th Amendment. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, is this sedition? Right? Because they're actually editing words in real time in order to make the argument for the removal of a duly elected sitting president of the United States. And that like thinking about that just blew my mind, because I didn't think that the world worked like that. I didn't think that a big globalist corporation like that would stoop so low as to just delete words in order to gaslight a duly elected president in order to remove him for, mental incapacity. But there we go. That was what was happening right in front of me, clear as day.
Is that the only thing that Google has done, or have they done a lot more than that?
They were employing blacklists when they said that they weren't. Like, they testified. I can't remember who it was, but it was some executive. Later it was Sundar Pichai actually said this, but they had been saying for a very long time that they were not using any blacklists. And so I'm sitting inside of Google, with access to all the searchable documents. And I say, well, I'm just going to wow, we don't use any blacklists. And I search for blacklist in their code database. And immediately I pulled up this page called the YouTube query blacklist. And in that text file had all these different keywords that they were using to blacklist sites from YouTube, believe it or not. And so I'm like, well, wait a minute. How are they telling Congress that they're not using blacklists? Don't they even just attempt to search it in their own search engine? And so, this is another example of them, using this blacklist. And so I started looking, well, if there's this blacklist, maybe there's other blacklists. And I discovered that they were using blacklists for their Android phones for a product called Google Now. Right. And they were using this other blacklist for, that they'd used to censor news on the Las Vegas attack on October 1st, 2017. And not only was it for these specific events, but it seemed like there were these unrelated sites that were getting, taken out, delisted from the Google index that had nothing to do with the event. There was a website called ecatworld.com that exclusively reports on the happenings of low energy nuclear reactions. You've probably heard it as cold fusion. They take palladium, they soak it with deuterium, and then they apply an oscillating electrical current, and they get this, what appears to be a nuclear reaction. Well, this website was reporting on sort of like an industry newsletter that was talking about all the developments throughout the world about this, type of technology. Well, they got taken off the Google, search index. And they're like, even if you type in our exact, .com, it doesn't appear. So now we have to make a .org so that people can find us again and we can go back on the search index. But now all of our backlinks are gone, so we're deranked. So I went in and I said, well, I work at Google. Maybe I can figure out what's going on. So I type in their exact, URL, and it brings me to one of these blacklists that were used on the Las Vegas massacre, which, by the way, I've released in my disclosure. And this blacklist has all these things related to the Las Vegas massacre, but in there it has ecatworld.com, and then it's got a bunch of made up terms. It's got an invalid subdomain, and it's got all of these keywords that make it seem like it's pointing to articles that have to do with quote unquote fake news with the Las Vegas shooting. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, wait a minute, how come they're putting this? Who would go to the trouble of creating a fake URL to take away this cold fusion energy website? And what I realized is that, I realized after digging in that this cold fusion was actually a real process, and that every first world country in the world had never abandoned the research. Japan, China, India, they're all studying this stuff. Lockheed Martin, it turns out that 60 Minutes had done an episode saying, actually, it turned out we were all wrong. Cold fusion was real all the time, and all these defense contractors are studying it. And then I said to myself, well, if this is real, then I'm going to make a couple predictions. One is that Google is going to invest in this because they want to keep their finger on the pulse. And two, they're not going to want to talk about this publicly because they will violate the narrative. And so using that prediction, I started searching, and what I found was that Google had a secret cold fusion lab at the time. Now it's open. Now they're like, oh yeah, we've been studying it for years, right? You can even search on this, and but they claim that it was fruitless and they weren't able to find anything. I don't necessarily trust them on that story. But it turns out that they had a secret cold fusion lab. They were studying it themselves, and I went, okay, well, like, it's clear that what we're being told, on a whole bunch of wide-ranging topics is not the same. And so I started to get more and more convinced that that as the censorship was ramping up, that there wasn't really going to be a limit to it, because I was like, every single time I put like a line in the sand and said, well, I don't think that Google is going to, blow past this line, they went past it, and then again, and then again, and then again. And I started thinking to myself, like, well, what's the ideology behind this? And then I started like realizing that there's this like central bank Marxist ideology that the central bank uses in order to subvert entire nations. I listened to this amazing talk by a KGB defector by the name of Yuri Bezmenov, and he laid out this process of how the United States was going to be subverted, and he laid it out based upon his knowledge of what he had done to Pakistan under the influence of, Russia, and that, he escaped to America. Now he's telling us how it's going to happen. And I listened to the whole lecture probably about 5 times, and I went, this is exactly what's going on right now. This is a form of ideological subversion, and they're bringing Google into a weaponized state in order to overthrow the presidency. And by this time the impeachment had happened, and QAnon was coming onto the scene. And so I started to realize that we were in a full-blown war. And so, at this time I started collecting a whole bunch of documents because, they were available to me as a full-time engineer, just like they're available to every other full-time engineer. I didn't really have any special access. And I realized that, the people that are the operators of this have an ideology. And it's an ideology that's pushed by the mainstream media, by the academics. And it's a form of collective group thought where if the priest class believes something is right, then they believe that it's going to be right. And so because they believe that they're in the right, they don't even have any idea that what they're doing is actually wrong. And so they're not even trying to hide any of these evil plans, because to them, what they're doing is completely good. It's the other guy that's evil and justifying what they're doing. So I realized that now that I had access, I was going to download everything that I can and store it as a collection of PDFs. And so we're now getting into like the end of 2017, 2018. I'm like, okay, I need to, do something here, because Google is the biggest fish in the biggest pond, and they're going to present the biggest problem for the Patriots as they're trying to, end this current system. And if the Patriots lose, we're going to go into a form of dictatorship, because there's this thing that I learned where all dictatorships are the result of a failed revolution, right? And so I realized at this point that, the Patriots better win. And if they don't, we're going to have, some sort of central bank dictatorship that's going to take in its place, because they're going to realize, well, nothing can stop us. If you win the revolution, then nothing can stop you at that point. You're in the position of military dominance. And so I decided at this point that I did not want, what was going to happen to my country, the same that had happened to these other failed, Marxist revolutions, like what happened to the Soviet Union, where like tens of millions of people died. So I started seeking out friendly media that could help me take this cache of documents and disclose it to the American public. Because, all these plans that are put in behind the scenes, the one thing that they fear is public disclosure. Like once the public sees what's really going on, then they're going to be revolted. And they're going to say this is a problem. And then all of a sudden their plans are going to get, they're not going to be able to implement them. And so I realized that the way to undo all of this was to have full disclosure to the public with a friendly media group. And after going through and navigating the networks, I realized that the best place to disclose this information was going to be Project Veritas. And that was because of the integrity of James O'Keefe. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that have heard the constant narrative from the mainstream media that James O'Keefe is not credible, that he doctors his videos. And this was my impression, as well, because I come from that same sort of cultural indoctrination. So I went through and researched for myself whether any of the claims that the mainstream media was doing were legitimate. And what I found, yet again, was that the exact opposite of what the mainstream media was saying was true, that he wasn't the most uncredible person in politics and media. He was actually one of the most credible people. And so because of this integrity, because of the degree that the mainstream media was attacking him, I used that as a signal to say, this is the best person who I should give this information to. And so we reached out, we connected. He sent over a handler that handled the information transfer from myself to his company and was able to craft this story. And then as we started ramping into this, it's kind of interesting. Something came from the top and my handler had to switch gears and then go after Twitter. And so you may remember a Project Veritas story sometime in 2018 where they had done an undercover sting operation and found out that Twitter was shadow banning conservatives.
Yeah. Yep,
and they were like talking openly. That was my handler that had done that sting operation. And he elicited my help in order to do that. And I told him that the only help that I could give him was, sort of the ideology behind these people based upon, assuming that's similar to what's happening at Google. And so tangentially, I had a part in that Twitter story as well, though, I had very little to actually do with it in terms of the amount of hours spent. But so I gave this information to my handler. He passed it on to James O'Keefe. And then James O'Keefe took a look at all this information. And it was so he actually told me later that he didn't act on it originally because he suspected that it was some sort of false intelligence. That was a trap. And he didn't want to get caught in another trap because the deep state keeps on trying to get him into a number of traps. And they actually got some operatives in his company that almost destroyed Project Veritas, which isn't a widely known fact. But this happened in around 2018. And so he was really at this point cautious. And he's like, I don't really trust this information. It seems too crazy and out there. I think it's a trap. So he didn't act on it. And it wasn't until 2019 when he was, for whatever reason, doing an undercover operation in the Bay Area and got a Google engineer to basically, talk about his project, which turned out to be machine learning fairness, and then validated all the things that I had, the large points that I had told James O'Keefe. And so he's like, okay, we need to start doing like a full-on undercover sting operation. They targeted multiple people, got them into a public location where they could record what they were saying without breaking any laws. And so, because there's no expectation of privacy if you're in a Mexican restaurant sipping on a margarita, there is if you're inside a private area that's not open to the public. Okay. And so based upon the intel given them about who was responsible for implementing this machine learning fairness, they were able to target those individuals, and they got Jen Janai, who was an executive director in the AI space. And she said that, this is almost verbatim, but that she loved Elizabeth Warren, but she disagreed on her on the need to break up Google, because if Google's broken up into all these other smaller companies, then these companies together don't have the power to stop the next Trump situation in 2020.
Wow. So
here she is admitting that Google is trying to stop the next Trump situation in 2020. What exactly does that mean? Obviously it's up to interpretation. I know that these people, like if you look at their behavior, it's obvious they think that Trump is an illegitimate president. They think that Russia elected him, so they feel that they have to react by preventing these fake Russian trolls from rigging the next election. right? And so, but it was an admit that this is what Google was going to try to do. And so this anchored the story with a human face. And so, let's go to so this recording was done sometime in April or May. And at this point, YouTube is doing like yet another adpocalypse where everyone like you and, Tim Pool and all these other people, they're being like destroyed with demonetization. Like, and you probably, had this experience.
Was this planned on purpose?
This was planned on purpose. They made all these mistakes, but these mistakes always like hurt the user and deprive them of money. So you probably had this experience where your video comes on and then automatically gets demonetized for the 12-hour surge. And then you're appealing the decision. And then they reviewed the decision and said, oh, we made the wrong decision. We're restoring your monetization. But you're like, but now I'm just getting the tail end of the views, right? Well, that's too bad. And then it happens again. It happens again. And it happens again day in and day after. It keeps on happening. It doesn't change. And so they kept on doing all these tweaks that were depriving people of money. And my understanding is that this was depriving them of, resources, whether it's view counts. Basically, they don't want you guys to grow, because what the truth tellers are saying are things that destabilize the current system. Right. And they want to preserve that current system because, it's clear by me at this point that they're trying to get back, the central bank is trying to get back into control. And so they're messing with you guys. And it looked like in April that they were doing sort of like the major blow to you guys. And that's when the recommendation, which I call the up next algorithm, really started to change, started to redirect everyone from another content creator that was similar to Fox News.
I know. Yeah, I noticed that everything, and then everyone's views went way, way down.
Yeah, exactly. And so, everyone's views was going down. And at this point, like I had actually written like, notice of intolerable, conditions twice, but I never like handed it off to my boss because I chickened out or something. But finally I said, I can no longer like work in this environment. I had no idea that James O'Keefe had done a sting operation. I thought that he wasn't returning my calls. So I assumed that he had just, for whatever reason, abandoned it. And so I was like, I can't take this anymore. I'm too far away from my values, and I don't want America to be overthrown. So I'm a wreck. I'm just going to hand in my resignation letter and be gone by the end of June and go back to my own business, which is I've got a side hustle where I sell the world's best bicycle glove. It's got an LED signal on the back of the hand. So I'm like, I'm just going to go back to that and be a product manufacturer because it's enjoyable and I don't have to live under hell's conditions. So I'm in my room writing my resignation letter when I get a call out of the blue. And coincidentally, it's James O'Keefe. And he's like, hey, Zach, like, we've got this transcript and we want you to sort of like look at it and give us your interpretation, And I said, fine. Yeah, absolutely. So he sends me this letter. I read it. It's Jen Janai talking about stopping the next Trump situation in 2020. So I call him back and I went, oh my God, you did it. And I proceed to go on this rant talking about how this was exactly what they were thinking. You got them to just say it out there. Congratulations. This is going to be a defining moment in history. And then after I got through with the rant, they just sort of had a pause and they said, can you come to New York tomorrow and say that on camera? And I said, what a coincidence. I'm writing my resignation letter right now. And so I get off the phone. I finish it was the first resignation letter I'd ever written, by the way. And it was also probably going to be the best. I was so happy, Dave, to like be exiting from that situation. I come in, or actually I email the letter to my boss, and then immediately I get placed under investigation by the global securities team. I thought that this might happen because like, when you access the system, you kind of leave like little crumbs, like you get stored in logs and stuff. So, I'm assuming that whenever someone leaves and they're disgruntled which my boss knew that I was due to the censorship. They might just put them under investigation. They immediately came to me and said, over text message, like, whoa, we want to ask you about these documents that you accessed. And they didn't know, and they didn't tell me what documents I'd accessed. And I just went, oh my gosh, this might be a problem. So I said, no, I'm resigning and I don't want to take place in any investigation because I'm done with this drama. And so I got on a plane. I went to New York. When I landed, everything had been shut down. They said, don't bother coming into work. We're accepting your resignation immediately. And then I came out anonymously under shadow and we released two pages of the 950 that I had disclosed to Project Veritas. And Project Veritas made a video that they disclosed to the public. And it was kind of like information sparse because we didn't release the whole treasure trove at that point. We only released 2 pages. But we had the Gen I talking about stopping the next Trump situation in 2020. And so that turned into a huge story. And you probably remember that.
Yes, I remember it.
June of 2019. Holy crap. That was like they released it on a Wednesday. They should have released it on a Monday, actually, in retrospect. But they released it on a Wednesday, and it took up the entire narrative for 3 days. And so James was like, hey, you should consider releasing all of the documents. And I kind of thought to myself, well, should I? I do know I kind of have this target on my back, but then I started realizing that that my intentions may not be pure if I were to release everything. That I was asking myself, and I actually started praying to God about this. I was like, am I wanting to release these documents because it's going to be in the public interest, or am I living out some sort of revenge fantasy? And the answer that I got back in this overwhelming sort of hard to describe feeling was, hold on, don't be vengeful, walk away and let them do, and know that because the Patriots have this information that they're going to do the right thing. And so I walked away and I was like, okay, I'm going to do my own business and make money doing my own thing. And it'll just be this secret and no one will know that I'm actually the Google whistleblower. And then if my business doesn't work out in the end, I can go back to the labor force and get a job as a programmer. Well, Google decided that they weren't going to just let it go. They triangulated that it was me. It wasn't hard. I left and then I spilled the beans and then, I accessed the same documents that got disclosed. So they got on me pretty quickly with the law firm and started to engage in sort of legal warfare, I guess, destroy someone's finances and their reputation and all this kind of stuff. And so I got this letter from this really nasty collection of lawyers, demanding access to all of my personal information to sort of comb through and figure out what I may or may not still be retaining from the company. And I started asking, defense lawyers, and they're saying, oh yeah, this is the first step in getting destroyed. This happened to Kevin Cernecki, but they didn't tell me it was Kevin, but I figured it out later. But he actually followed the rules and complained to the National Labor Review Board about what Google was doing to conservatives within the company. And Google ambushed him and then made up a criminal charge saying that he was maliciously trying to get all their information in order to conduct corporate espionage. And so they put him through a criminal system in addition to a civil system. And he had lost $100,000, on legal bills, and there was really no end in sight. So I thought to myself, well, this is what my future is going to be. And if I just comply with them, then they're not going to let me go. They're just going to continue this whole thing. And I remembered well, what is it that they fear? And I said, public disclosure. So I realized that if they got all my information, then they were going to lock me down and maybe I get a gag order. So I said, I'm not going to help them cover this up. I'm going to expose all of them. I took the 950 pages of documents. I printed them all up. I put them into a giant box. And I slapped a label on and I sent it to Washington, D.C., to the DOJ antitrust division. I then went to James O'Keefe and I said, hey, James, if anything happens to me, you have my permission to release everything to the public, full public disclosure, thus, setting up a dead man's trigger. I then go to Twitter and I say to Twitter, In the event of my untimely death, all documents be disclosed to the public. And so I sent that. 4 hours after posting that tweet, I had police come to my house. And I was able to see that it was police and anticipate that they were coming because they actually came to my friend's house because I gave Google a intentionally wrong address. And so I got heads up that they were coming because they first came to my best friend's house. Now they're at my house. Now that I know the police are there, I'm like, well, I'm just not going to answer the police because I don't have to. And so rather than them just going away and leaving me alone, they decided that they saw something that was questionably suspicious, which was a can of denatured alcohol near my gate. And so they said, well, this could be a bomb. And so they called in a bomb threat. And that means that they had to call in the bomb squad. They had to bring in robots. They had to shut down the streets from 20th in Valencia all the way to 22nd in Valencia. Now, keep in mind, I didn't realize that they had done this. And so I was just hiding out in my room and, peeping through the curtains and saying, oh, there's still police out there. And I was on the second floor so I could look down the street, and I started using my phone with as a camera, as kind of a periscope to sort of peek out and see what was going on. I went, man, the cops are still here. So I was laying low going through my house. And then I started hearing a helicopter flying close to my house. And I was thinking to myself, no, that's just paranoid thinking to believe that this helicopter's coming for me. And then I hear two helicopters and I went, what is going on? It must be like some sort of homicide that just coincidentally happened. And then I just think that, cause coincidences do happen sometimes, that I just, happened to have the police come by and check on me while a homicide happened. That's why there's helicopters. Well, no, it turns out that the helicopter's really for me. There was a bomb threat. And I realized this when my best friend, who was coming to visit me, saw that all the streets had been blocked off. And when he questioned why it was and asked them if they were here for Zach, they said, who are you? He's like, I'm his best friend. And he had known about this dead man switch and everything that had happened. So, he was not that surprised, even though it was alarming. So he called me up and said, yeah, they're here for you. And so I tried not to meet with the police, but they told me that they were not going to leave, that they were going to do shifts until I got out of the house. And I started realizing that if I don't come outside, maybe they'll figure out a reason called extravagant circumstances to force their way into the house. And then maybe something bad happens to me and their cameras don't work, right?
Yep.
That's happened before.
Yes, it has.
So I thought to myself, well, if this is what's going to happen if I don't come out, then I might as well go outside, because what's outside? It's the public. What does the public have? They've got phones. They're going to be recording because this is interesting content. If there's something that happens, then there's going to be 30 different people with cell phones recording that are going to witness it, and they're going to upload it to Twitter. They're going to upload it to Facebook. They're going to have a problem. So I decided that I'm going to come out and I'm going to meet the police out in the street. And so there's video of me coming out with my hands up. There's police with rifles. When I come outside, I see that there's police stationed up on the rooftops adjacent on the other side of the street. And this is all because I didn't answer the door. And so I was compliant. I did everything that they asked me to do. They detained me. They didn't handcuff me. They put my hands behind my back. And then they took me across the street, and then they asked me a bunch of questions, such as, do you want to hurt yourself? Do you want to hurt others? Are you supposed to be on any medications? They're basically trying to figure out, and if I answer wrong to any of these, then, they take you to a hospital and then you get evaluated under, a physician. And so, at the end, after these questions, which I answer all fine, they asked me, well, why would Google call this in? Now, I had known that Google was doing it because who else could do it? But that was the first moment that I had a concrete explanation of who called in this wellness check. I said, the reason why Google would do this is because I disclosed 950 pages to the DOJ. And they said, do you have any proof of that? And I actually had taken a picture of the letter that I had sent to the attorneys in response, admitting that I had retained documents and that I had given it to the DOJ. So I let the police officer read this letter that I had typed out, and they went, oh my gosh, you're a whistleblower. And I said, yep, I am a whistleblower. And that's why you're here is because you're acting on behalf of Google's interests. And so after that, everything de-escalated. And the media who had been covering what was happening just abruptly ended the news coverage and didn't let the public know anything about what happened, right? Because it didn't go as, like, I guess they were hoping. And so the next day I got on a flight and I went to Washington, D.C. And then I went on video again, this time without a mask, without sort of any anonymizing features, as myself, and clearly explained to the American public what this system was and how exactly they were censoring all of you content creators. And so then that started the second sort of full disclosure of what had happened and how it all worked. And my goal with this disclosure was to give, because there's good guys in the government, right? And those good guys currently are investigating Google for antitrust. But what they need is that they need, like, I guess you could call it ammunition. They need to have, they need to know what's going on. Because Google, you see, they built themselves this fortress. And that fortress is called discovery. They don't want anyone to do electronic discovery no matter what, because as soon as they're audited, we're going to find out in court record that they've been up to all kinds of things. That this line that they've been saying in Congress is fiction.
So they've been lying to Congress.
They've been lying to Congress.
Yeah.
So by giving them this insight, I've now given these attorney generals that are investigating, the threshold of plausible suspicion that would allow them to crack through this wall, this electronic discovery wall, and get in there and start auditing. And Dave, once they start auditing,
what are they going to find?
What else are they lying about? So this is, and then I've been, trying to keep this alive in the public. I feel it's actually got a life of its own at this point. I put all of this information, I've centralized it on zachvorhees.com. So when people are searching for this, they can find this information and it's all digested. They know exactly where to go and where to look. And, because there's a lot of state attorney generals looking into this. There's 52 states and territories, and there's 51 attorney generals that are looking at this. So the only one that I believe it's not looking into this is the one for California, which is obvious. Google is based in California. And so they're all working independently and possibly also together in some aspects. But it's not just those state attorney generals. It's also the city of New York, and it's also the federal government. And so now we've got 3 administration levels of governance investigating Google in order to figure out what it is that they're, not being truthful in and what they are. And, let's get this whole thing cracked open and let's see what's really going on, because, this company controlled everything.
Yeah, they control everything that they want you to see.
Yeah, from your email,
yeah,
from your phone, from your child's education. Like, if this had been like just a normally corrupt company, I would not have blown the whistle. The problem is that Google's used everywhere, and it posed a threat to the system. And they actually had the momentum to rig the election in 2020. And now that I've given the Patriots a head up, now they have the legal tools necessary for Google to stop the rigging. And as you've probably seen, a lot of the censorship that they've been doing has reversed.
So why do you think it has reversed? Like, because now, like, when I type in, like, say, Hillary Clinton email, it comes up with scandal with the suggestions. If you type in, like, Rachel Chandler, it shows pictures now. People are noticing this. Why do you think this all of a sudden reversed, where now you can see all this information?
Right. Well, there's one thing that's kind of uncommon, because we're still in this narrative, like, oh, well, YouTube's censoring conservatives, they're censoring conservatives, and there has been censorship in place. But despite all the censorship, the growth rate of these YouTubers has continued to grow. It started to stop back in April, May, and June, but that's when I came out with the disclosure, because I saw these channels reversing their gains and starting to lose subscribers. And so, what Google's been doing is that they've been releasing on some of the censorship for the YouTube commentators themselves, and they've allowed the channels to grow again after a short hiccup in Q2 of 2019. And so I've actually noticed that despite the popular narrative that Google's only getting worse in their censorship, I've seen that they've actually relaxed some of the censorship. And I think that you went from 250,000 subscribers to now over 650,000 subscribers.
Yeah, I noticed that the count went up quite a bit. I mean, even the views, the count, and I know that this is not normal. I even noticed on my website too, like things like this is not normal. I normally don't see this.
Yeah. And so what I attribute that to is this disclosure that I did, making it public. You know, one of the targets was the lawyers for the attorney generals, but another one was actually the operators of Google itself. Because those people, they think that they're in the right. They have no idea that Google's up to all this election rigging. By giving them this proof, they're going to be like, well, I'm interested. Let's see what's going on. And they see this and they go, oh my God, this is true. Oh my God, this is true. And then, you know, they see something like the YouTube query blacklist, which is a whole rabbit hole in itself. And I suggest you look at that one. Holy crap. But they start to see this and they start to wake up. It's like a red pill. They're like, wow, Google's not as they say. It's actually this evil force. And so they've got some degree of autonomy within the company. They have influence they affect policy. And so when Google's like, hey, let's apply more censorship, instead of everyone being, yeah, we're all on board with this. What's happening is that you've got what I call liberals that are now waking up saying, well, wait a minute, we're betraying our liberal values. Like, why don't we just let the people choose whoever they want to follow? Like, why are we doing all these things that prevent, you know, a free and open internet when our mission statement is essentially supporting a free and open internet? So what I think is that a lot of the operators have been pushing back I was told by people that I was formerly friends with that hate me now because of this disclosure, saying that this disclosure just screwed up the company so much they had to ban political content on the email. Like, no one can talk about politics anymore. And they're changing their corporate culture based on this disclosure. And also think about it. Like, if they do all the censorship and then someone comes and then, you know, does this huge disclosure, well, then what's going to happen if they do more censorship? Is that going to lead to more disclosure? Like, do they know everything that their employees might have downloaded in the last 3 years? All of a sudden, what I've done is I've made management aware of the inherent risks of more censorship to their bottom line. And they're probably getting pushback like, hey, you know, pushback from their stockholders, where their stockholders are saying, hey, why are you doing all this censorship? It's against your values. It's destroying the company. Don't do censorship, censor less. And so all these different factors have been sort of this, you know, low level, almost background noise resistance towards screwing up all of the algorithms and letting the algorithms just be themselves, which is measuring engagement and trying to match people up with content that they find engaging. And if you just let that happen, what I call organic results, then the organic results will reconfigure the internet so that it gives you what it is that you're looking for. Yeah. And so I want to finish up by saying, you're like, well, what happened with all this specific stuff that happened within the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. Go ahead.
Right. So in the last couple of weeks, we had a very radical shift where the deep state seemed to get exposed. And there was also some sort of funny things that happened, like you search for the Democrat Party and it shows you like a rat instead of a donkey. And you start searching for things like Pizzagate and Hillary Clinton and what you find, and like the Podesta art. And you start finding all of this information that Google was censoring. All of a sudden, the censorship sort of released. And I knew this was happening because I had a flood of people come to me and start saying, oh, like Google changed their censorship engine. And the first two, I was like, yeah, whatever. And then by the third one, I was like, okay, there's a pattern. Sure enough, they changed everything. And it happened within one day. Well, there was an interesting coincidence that happened 24 hours before this censorship was released. And that was, there was this deal made between President Trump and Google. Okay, so we're currently in the middle of this questionably fake epidemic. Trump says, "Hey, we're going to work with Google in order to provide an application. This application is going to ask you a bunch of questions about symptoms, and then it's going to use AI to figure out whether you should be tested, and then it's going to match you up with the local testing center so you can get this drive-through test." And so, this is a really simple, easy sort of system to create, right? The whole idea that you need AI to figure out whether you should be tested, it's literally a flow chart. And the flow chart is simply an if-else, chain.
Right.
If you have a sore throat, then go get tested. Or if you have, a wet cough, then go get tested. Else, if you have a dry cough, then go get tested. If you have any one of these symptoms, you need to get tested. That's it. That's the AI that they're using. And then, then what's the second part of that system? The second part of that system is matching up the people with a local testing station. This has been a solved problem for over a decade, right? Probably even longer. And Google provides solutions for this where you can, put in a collection of locations, and then you put in a new location as your search query position. It brings you back the top 20 closest items to that location. So, you just imagine search for the 20 closest testing stations within, let's say, Oregon or Washington, and it's going to, give you the 20 closest. You just go to that. This whole system could be done by someone like myself, a senior engineer at Google, experienced with these APIs and these tools, or any other engineer that's senior and knows what they're doing. And they could probably have a good solution by the end of the weekend. It's really not anything that isn't anything other than a solved problem at this point. Google and Trump came to an agreement that Google would put not one engineer, but 1,700 engineers into solving this problem.
It's an interesting number, 17.
17, isn't that?
Yeah.
So think about each one of those engineers probably takes an average salary of around $200,000. And maybe this goes on for a month. Maybe it goes on for 3 months. Maybe it goes on for 6 months, right? That's a lot of money. Why is Trump giving all this money to Google and they still haven't had it done yet? Well, right after this money gets given to Google, well, we don't really know if they have given any money. I assume that they have. Whenever they announce a deal, I assume that some sort of transaction is going through.
Right.
Right after this happened, that's when the censorship released. That's when people started finding out all this information that had been censored about the deep state became known. That's what I think has happened in the last week with the deep state censorship being released.
So why do you think this happened at this time? Was this on purpose? Trump and the Patriots, they wanted this information to be seen?
I believe so, yeah. I think that we're getting towards the final stages. I think that, I think the white hats, if you want to call them that, are in control. And, there's this old thing called carrot and stick or silver and lead. Choose silver or choose lead, right? Silver is coin or lead is a bullet. And so I believe that the Patriots are playing that carrot and stick, silver or lead sort of scenario. We're hey, Google, we want you to stop censoring. And, we've got these tools to make you comply. Or if you comply voluntarily, then we'll give you this cash payout. And I think that Google just said, well, we'll just, if we don't get a choice either way, we'll just take the cash payout. And so I think that this is what it was. It was a cash payout to let the central bank system know that at any time, the Patriots could force Google to, release the censorship and let the public be aware of what's really going on. And I think there's still more to the story that's going to play out and reveal itself. but that's as much as I can reason about why they're playing this game the way that they are right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking the same way you are. I'm thinking that if everything comes to light and information comes out, and if Google was censored, people, what's the first thing they do is they go into Google, they type in, and they say, oh, look, nothing's coming up, so that can't be true. Now, if information comes out about pedophilia, about anything about Hillary Clinton or anything that you can think of, and they go onto Google and they search it and they hit results, then all of a sudden people start to research, people start to look and say, well, wait a minute, it is in Google, here it is. And they start to put all the pieces together, which helps bring all of this together. And that's my thought process right now, is why this is happening at this exact moment.
That's my best guess for what's happening too. And I think that, if the search algorithms can be biased towards the central bank deep state sort of narrative, then, we are in warfare. And the Patriots could turn around and have, all of Biden's searches, return matches that have him groping these young underage girls on C-SPAN, or, Project Veritas's disclosure on, Bernie Sanders if he were to come back and get the nominee, or if Michelle Obama or Clinton are able to get, sneak back into the ticket, then, their dirty laundry will be available. And that I think that this is sort of a display of power early on while we're still in spring, and before things start to heat up in the summer.
I agree. Zach, I want to thank you for coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see all your work?
So if people want to join the fight against Google censorship, they can follow me on twitter.com/perpetualmaniac, or just search for my name, Zach Voorhees. To see my disclosure, go to zachvoorhees.com, and you've got access to all 950 pages plus analysis.